they do an enormous amount of it. So I think it's important for us to fully understand why they do that and why the police department thinks that it's doing traffic enforcement. In the previous response to our previous questions, the department said our progress is measured by efforts or the amount of time and resources that are devoted to any area of the county. Our efforts are measured by results that are measured as outcomes. Outcomes come in the form of a written warning, citation, or emergency repair order. I'd like to ask, first of all, if that is really what the county thinks, because it doesn't mention safety.
So good evening to everyone, and good evening, Robin. I will tell you that safety is an important component of that. The outcomes are noted as we stated, but we do measure our traffic safety efforts by the amount in dedicated persons hours of work of high visibility enforcement against some of the top dangerous behaviors that we have on our roadways. And we also, when we look at traffic enforcement, reducing traffic collisions is a large purpose of why we conduct traffic enforcement. Traffic safety is important when you also understand that we have more fatalities in this county than we have homicides on a yearly basis. Mm-hmm. We have serious issues surrounding drunk driving in Montgomery County and in the region. And therefore, the roadways, in order for us to make sure that pedestrian safety is also a high priority alongside with the county as well. There are a variety of ways that we actually address this, but when we look at this as far as reducing traffic collisions, we're talking about protecting life as well as property, sure. Reducing the number of events that we have on our roadways, working in coordination with other agencies, not just from an enforcement standpoint, but also an educational standpoint, and also from an engineering standpoint as we work with road agencies such as the Maryland State Highway Administration or the Montgomery County Department of Transportation, as we look at these high risks that happen in our roadways to make sure that we have proper engineering in order to make sure that we are providing the best possible outcomes to reduce the collisions that are happening on our roadways, sure. In a variety of different ways, whether it's vehicles against vehicles or it's vehicles sometimes against the pedestrian.
Thank you, Chief Jones. That that does help. I would just note that what you're before we move on, that what you're calling an outcome here is really an input. What you're calling an output is the amount of effort you're putting in. That's what you're measuring here, or what you say you're measuring. I don't think that is really an output, an outcome. The outcome is traffic accident reduction.
Well, if I could have continued my what I was saying, I would have gotten to the point that I would have noted that, for example, when we work with our Vision Zero program and working with those 3 E's that I spoke about, we highlighted the fact that we were able to reduce pedestrian collisions by 30%. In areas that across the county. But there are outcomes when we also talk about not only just the inputs, but when you're removing drunk drivers from your roadways, you're again, reducing the numbers of collisions that you're having on your on our highways. So there's other statistics that we also provide. And again, this is why we went to a central traffic unit direction for the fact that we can now look at those particular statistics as we put efforts in these high visibility roadways not only just from a perspective of the things that I noted, but also working towards expediting the flow of traffic for AM rush hour as well as PM rush hour, when we know we have these roadways that are being clogged across this region, particularly in Montgomery County, due to vehicle collisions that occur and can have a major impact on commuters. So this is one of the main functionalities of the central traffic unit that we're focusing on in order to move our roadways in a more efficient manner.
Thank you. So I think we have questions both about the CTU and about the districts and district patrol officers. As I understand it, the new CTU is designed really specifically to aim at high volume areas where there are a lot of accidents and where you're really trying to use data-driven policing to figure out what to do about them and how to enforce in those specific areas. That's my understanding of CTU. And I understand, as you said in your earlier answer, that it has a bunch of other functions relating to, roadway design. And this makes a great deal of sense to have a professionalized traffic enforcement unit. It does still seem as though, so that being said, I do have some questions about that, but I'd also like to ask about the stops made by district patrol officers, because as I understand it, 80% of stops are made by district patrol officers. Is that still true after the shift to CTU? I mean, it was not quite clear to me.
Well, we're still gathering data on that. Remember, central traffic just began July 1st.
Yeah.
Right. So we haven't really compared.
But I guess the point would be that there's most probably are still being done by district officers.
Well, you have a larger pool of district officers. For example, I only have 20, I believe I have approximately 25 central traffic unit officers.
Right.
And again, for 498 square miles.
Right.
And again, their focus is primarily on our major roadways.
Yes.
We have 600 plus patrol officers throughout the 6 police districts in the county. That work, those officers work, they're not one officer, but there's a 24/7 operation involving the 6 police districts. So the probability that you have more officers and they are working 24/7, where the central traffic motors are only working generally about 18 hours out of the day.
Sure.
So that's the significance of yes, the patrol officers are more than likely gonna have more, collectively are gonna have more traffic stops numbers than our central traffic unit. That's correct.
So let's talk about district traffic stops for a little bit. You used to be commander of the Silver Spring division.
That's correct.
I wonder if you could talk to us from that perspective for a moment about how you would manage a sort of traffic. As my understanding is that those officers are subject to the commander's plan for traffic accident reduction and for traffic enforcement, that the commander is in charge of deciding what the officers do and how they meet their plan. I wondered if you could talk from your experience as a district commander in how you would how you manage traffic enforcement within your district.
Absolutely. So as a district commander, you have a variety of functions as a patrol. As your patrol officers have a variety number of functions as a patrol officer, not just traffic enforcement.
Of course.
So of course, their responsibility first and foremost is to answer calls for service, our 911 center, and be available for emergency type calls, first and foremost. And that, there are crime issues that are in your districts that are directed by the district commander to address crime issues in the district. So there's other quality of life issues as well that may be needed to be addressed. So there's part of that functionality. But there are also, as a district commander, I was responsible for all of the communities within the 3rd district that would sometimes have concerns about traffic safety in their particular neighborhoods. So whether it's Hillendale, whether it could be downtown Silver Spring, it could be in the Woodside community, there could be a variety of different communities that would provide us with additional requests for some sort of traffic enforcement, maybe within their districts. It could be during school hours, in some of the school zones. It may be late night, where you may have drag racing complaints and loud muffler complaints that might be disturbing people's quality of life. So with those types of complaints being sent to the district commander, you would then, as a district commander, would then will assign either a beat sergeant or her officers the responsibility of addressing that, depending upon the time of day. If that was a special, if that was a request that had come down, and again, a response to a community complaint. There may also be not simply a community complaint, but the reality is that the expectations of officers would be that while they are out patrolling, particularly on any given shift, it is that they are monitoring traffic safety to make sure that drivers are driving safely on our streets and in our intersections to protect life and to protect property. So those are the instructions that would generally be given, and the expectations by the commanders that as a police officer, you are expected to act when you would see any traffic violation that needs to be addressed. I think what's most important that you have to focus upon is, again, what is the legitimacy of your traffic stop? Why are you making that traffic stop, for example, in order to address the safety concern that you may have, whether it is speeding, whether it's running a red light, or some other unsafe movement that needs to be addressed from that perspective of traffic violations.
Okay, so from what you said, every district patrol officer is responsible for enforcing traffic while they're on patrol. And in addition, there are times when the commander will assign some kind of specific enforcement because of complaints or to specific officers. So I guess my question is, okay, is that really the limit of the commander's traffic enforcement capabilities, if you like? I mean, during your time as commander, did you have any help from the central office to say, okay, this is where your district has problems. This is where there's an excess number of accidents, or it's a black spot of some kind. And can you develop a plan to deal with it? So the question would be, say you have your officers all out there on the streets, but do you have district level plans for traffic enforcement? And if so, where do they come from? And what do they look like? And who assesses whether they're working?
So the assessment, those directions would come out of our centralized traffic division. So we've had a traffic division for quite some time.
Yeah.
And that centralized traffic division has a traffic analyst that actually analyzes collisions at locations across the county. And for each district, it's specified where are your generalized hotspots, as we term them, for traffic collisions. For example, I could realize that particularly in morning rush hour on Route 29 going into downtown Silver Spring, right, all the way from Burtonsville, really, that we would have, you could see the certain areas where we would see problems where traffic collisions were occurring because they were reported traffic collisions during those hours. And therefore we would address it and assign our traffic units to those corridors in order to be able to try to address some of those issues that we were finding, whether it was distracted driving, that we would find that people were just driving rear-ending each other. And why was that? Was that because people were on their cell phones as they were sitting in bumper to bumper traffic and running into someone while not paying attention? Yes, we were finding that was mostly the case in many of those circumstances. So it absolutely that we would look at also where were our pedestrian collisions occurring. And from that perspective, we would work with the state on grants to have educational campaigns. We still do it today, where we actually would put officers on at particular intersections, for example, at Colesville and Georgia Avenue, to make sure that our pedestrians were crossing the roadway in a safe manner. And anytime that people would be in violation, we would basically, whether it was a vehicle or whether it was a pedestrian, we would address that accordingly. And again, focus not always on citations, but it would be on education, and sometimes it would be enforcement, or it may be just simply a warning. And that is something that, again, we wanted to make sure that people were aware of their surroundings, when people are not on their cell phones crossing the street when the crosswalk was actually they were not allowed to cross the street at that particular moment, or that people in their vehicles are making a right turn on red when they're not supposed to, and causing pedestrian collisions as a result of them, again, not paying attention and violating the law. So there are a variety of different initiatives that we would actually focus on based upon the analysis that we would receive on a monthly basis from our traffic division. And therefore, the commander, we were held accountable to make sure that we had some focus in order to be able to reduce the amount of collisions that were occurring in our particular police districts.
That's great. It would be helpful, I think, if you perhaps shared an example of those kinds of plans and messages. It would give us a better understanding of how they kind of work.
I'll be more than happy to show you charts and to show you how we actually.
Sure, that would be great.
Absolutely.
So let me, one of the sort of the background concerns here obviously is racial disparities in traffic stops, and there's been plenty of evidence that there are different kinds of racially disparate outcomes even in Montgomery County. I think we all understand that there are differences between racism, unintentional bias, and systemic bias, and that each of those can play a part in creating disparate outcomes. Has MCPD undertaken its own studies of racial disparities in traffic stops?
No, we have not.
Okay.
No.
Okay, thank you. Would suggest possibly it might be time, but let me just go back to again to your role as when you were a commander, and talk about individual officers. One of the questions that's come up in our discussions is, okay, so you have all these patrol officers out there. They are making the majority of the stops. It's hard to tell if there are problems with individual stops because data is what it is. But I guess the question also goes to incentives for officers, and I understand that from a perspective of management, you have 600 patrol officers out there doing something. And it it is quite a challenge to measure effectiveness in that environment. It really is. It's not easy to find objective measures rather than, you know, the sergeant likes this officer better than that officer. That's not a good way to go. So one obvious place where there are actually hard data for individual officers is, okay, what do they do for traffic? Traffic enforcement is one of the, let's say, the places where you can see activity most easily. So on the other hand, traffic enforcement is a place where you definitely do not want to incentivize officers to issue tickets or warnings merely to pad their numbers. And we've had, you know, had cases in other jurisdictions where that's perfect, you know, it's obvious that that is what has happened. So how do you balance the need to find objective measures of performance, bring in traffic enforcement, which is part of that, and yet still not give incentives for piling on?
So I would start with this, is the fact that every police officer, or I would say each police district, is not the same. And so when you look at what is focus, right, what is the area of responsibility for any given officer, in some areas that are more suburban and more rural, and they have a larger area of beat responsibility. And again, you look at that and to see the amount of traffic and the traffic issues that that particular officer may have to deal with, compared to, for example, answering large numbers of calls for service that may be more related to crime issues, report writing, or other types of investigations. Because again, or what is the other responsibilities, provided that, for example, that we know that we have an accident where an officer might be placed on a post for 2 hours because of accident cleanup.
Sure.
Or any other investigation that you might have, that it's a criminal investigation, requires a lot of work that they only may be out in really patrolling maybe only 2 to 3 hours a day because they are tied up with other responsibilities. In our rating system, again, when you say incentives, again, as we have answered the question, there are no quotas based upon our collective bargaining agreement. So there are no numbers that are put out to any officer that says that you have to do, you have to bring in these amount of traffic violations or contacts per shift, as an example, to give me proof to show that you are worth your weight and you have out there and you're doing something that's constructive. There's a lot of other things that go into the mix. As I noted, not only with those responses of calls for service, there's also other community engagement that I may assign an officer or officers to go to some event that's happening in their beat, that we want some community engagement, depending upon the event that's occurring, that will take them out of their role of actually patrolling for particular traffic as a response of just one part of their job. Again, if you're on patrol, you're not only looking for traffic enforcement, you're also looking for any criminal activity or anything that's sort of disturbing the peace from that perspective. But I will note in our rating systems, there are 3 categories that only focuses on traffic for the patrol officers, okay? One is traffic enforcement, one is accident investigations, and the third is driving under the influence of alcohol or drugs enforcement. So you have 3 categories. And in your traffic enforcement, it basically, your rating reads as this is the expectation of your performance. You have 3 categories in the performance of you exceed the expectation, you meet the expectation, or you're below expectations. And that's one of those 3 boxes are checked by your supervisor. And basically it states that you detect traffic violations and you take appropriate action, which includes to, but is not limited to, parking tickets, warnings, physical arrests, etc., and any other selective enforcement as may be required. That's all the traffic enforcement. That's all that reads. Okay. From your accident investigation is that you respond to accidents and you make assessments of injuries, damage, and the traffic situation. And that you investigate the accident properly and you issue citations as appropriate. Okay. And your third and final is the driving under the influence of alcohol or drugs, is that you identify drunk drivers, you effect arrest, and you process processes as per department procedures. As you process the individual that's under arrest for drunk driving or under the influence of drugs per departmental procedures as required. Those are the requirements. Those are the only 3 traffic enforcements involved in our rating system that our officers are judged by their supervisors as they monitor. For example, if we have an officer who writes traffic tickets, they go to traffic court, right? And when you go to traffic court, you have to appear before judges to present your case. If you arrest DUIs, you are appearing with a state's attorney, but also who is prosecuting the case, but also with our judges. We get feedback from judges all the time. If we have an officer who, for example, doesn't understand the traffic law, if that was the case, we would get that feedback that provides us something that says this officer needs a better understanding about this particular traffic charge, as an example.
That's very helpful, and it's I'm very happy to hear that you get that feedback and take it into account. That's very helpful. Could you just give us a little bit more on that rating system? What share of the overall rating comes out of those 3 traffic line items, if you like? I mean, you're judging the officer's whole effectiveness, so this is only a part of it. Is this a small part, a large part? Could you talk?
It's only a small part, because there's also, again, there's other parts of the rating system that the officer is actually being judged on, right? He's also being charged on, or she is being looked at from criminal investigations, report writing, follow-up investigations. They are looked upon as far as community engagement. Some of the projects that they do.
Sure.
So there's an overall view. You're only there's categories that they're rated in, and there's comments by the supervisors about what the supervisor has observed for that officer during the rating period.
Yeah.
To provide specific, if they have specific incidents that they can point to that presents that the officer had some impact, positively or negatively, whatever the case may be, and whatever situation they address. You may have some officers who are stronger in criminal investigations and have very little interest in doing traffic enforcement. But we judge our officers, and you could have it vice versa. But you have supervisors who really are trying to shape an officer to be an all-around officer, to do all duties well. Sure. That is the ultimate goal. But we also recognize that there are those who have specific interests in investigations, who have specific interests in maybe it's traffic enforcement, and who want to go to, for example, the centralized traffic unit to ride a motorcycle and to be a part of that unit for that focus. Or they may want to do something else specialized, or they just may want to be the patrol officer. But the point being is that they are being judged holistically as a patrol officer in those categories.
Thank you, Chief Jones. Let's turn for a moment to the question of automation. One of the...
Can you speak up a little bit, Robin?
Sure. Yeah, sure. Is that better? Is that better, Vernon? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, that's better.
Sorry, I'll move the mic a little closer. One of the potential solutions to disparities in traffic enforcement cited out in other communities, and also in the recent OLO report, is the possibility of more automated traffic enforcement, where we are pretty sure that there is no bias. So in general, what first sort of broad question is, are you in favor of a substantial increase in red light cameras and in speeding cameras, perhaps separately? So that's the sort of first question. Do you think that that would be a positive step for the county?
Well, we are already in the process of expanding our red light and speed cameras across the county, as we are currently working with in the process of working with a new vendor that should be coming on board in the near future. And the expectation is that we will more than likely over the next 3 to 5 years double the amount of cameras that we have currently. So therefore, we are in support of additional cameras that will be on our roadways in many of our major roadways and in our communities.
We've been told that let's say that on state maintained roads, which are the larger roads in our community, the state has been somewhat reluctant to allow additional cameras. Could you tell us a little bit about that? Why would the state stand in the way? And as I understand it, about a third of MCPD requests have been denied. That presumably means that 2/3 were approved. So it's a barrier, but not an insuperable one. So if you could just tell us a little bit about who stands in the way, why they're doing that, and whether it's a significant problem, that would be helpful.
Well, I think it's fair to say, I think the state has created some barriers for some requests we have put in, particularly for red light cameras on our state highways. There is a significant, I would say, barrier in the sense of the logistics of where the cameras are being placed, the studies that are being done. For many times, for example, they will tell us that sometimes they don't want to put a particular red light camera in a particular intersection because they feel that it will create more collisions, such as rear-ended collisions, because people, knowing that the cameras will be there, will be making abrupt stops, causing these types of collisions. Again, and there is some evidence to that in some communities. So we have to. We don't totally dismiss that, but there's also problems that we run into sometimes logistically with the hardware of the camera, where it's being placed. So the state does have, and they have specific rules, and they are the gatekeeper on all red light automation in the county. That is done through the state law from that perspective. So they are the ones who are actually giving us the yes or no when it comes to saying that we are, we are able to at least apply for those locations that we want cameras. But they have a extensive study that they conduct, and the reason is that they do these studies is so there is no governmental influence on the process, to make sure that the data supports the need for those cameras being at those particular locations. That says that, whether there's significant red light violations as well as, collisions that are also occurring and causing those problems in our community.
Okay. And so far as your camera program, you said, is expanding substantially in the parts of the county that you control, if you like. that's the
On
plan.
county roadways, right?
Yes,
On
okay.
county roadways,
Okay.
correct.
Okay, so I think the last set of questions is a broad set. Last set of questions for me. I'm sure that the commissioners will have plenty to ask themselves. I want to
And
leave-
just and just a heads up, we have 11 follow-up questions.
Yeah,
10
exactly.
follow-up questions. Yeah.
Yeah. So that doesn't surprise me. So look, the evidence is that there are significant racial disparities in policing in Montgomery County related to traffic. Black drivers make up only 20% of Montgomery County's population, but they receive 38% of traffic-related arrests, 47% of searches, and 62% of probable cause searches. And we can go into the sort of numbers in detail, but different OLO has done studies, there are other studies. I just circulated one, a new one today. So I don't think there's any doubt that there are disparities. We don't really know exactly why there are disparities. I'm interested in really just hearing, okay, what do you plan to do about that?
So Robin, as you noted, you asked a question earlier about whether or not there have been a study done about disparities of drivers in Montgomery County from a racial perspective.
Yeah.
And I told you the answer is no.
Yeah.
And so to this date, there still has been no study done by anybody. And in fact, even though OLO in their report, they acknowledged that the statistics were only against the census data that was actually captured about the traffic data compared to those who drive in Montgomery County.
Correct.
I have made the statement publicly, this is not new, for the fact that I believe just that analysis is flawed. And it's flawed because, and I'm not saying that racial disparities are not happening in Montgomery County. That's not what I'm saying. I am saying that is a bad data set to analyze, and I'm not just the only one. There are significant research institutions, to include universities, that have also noted that this is not the way for any community or police department to look at racial disparities in traffic enforcement, simply because you're looking at census data. You're not looking at the driving population.
Right.
We live in, as we all know, in a region where we are bordered by, and we have a large commuter base that drive in and through Montgomery County. And we have communities of major that are, for example, that are the majority in their community, such as Prince George's County, that has a larger African-American population. Yet there are many people from Prince George's County that actually works in Montgomery County and drives through Montgomery County. So with that being said, that for me, I think in order to have a fair assessment, first and foremost, I think it would be most important for us, if there is going to be an investment, to look at what is the cause of why that folks believe that we stop and we treat people of color differently. I think that therefore there needs to be a true study that is invested in order to be able to make that assessment. Now, with that being said, we look at, again, when we look at traffic enforcement, right, and we look at where are the traffic stops occurring, why are they occurring in those areas? So we look at a map and we try to decide, for example, what is the reason why we are at a certain place, right? So that's one of the main reasons why I went to centralized traffic in a way, because it gave us the ability to know that we are looking at a particular area, because there is a reason, legitimate public safety reason why we are in that area. Now, I am not there. Again, we are there to judge the driver's performance. So if we're running laser for speed, for example, and we're running a radar and we're pointing a radar gun at a car, there's no way an officer can detect what is the race of the driver prior to the driver being stopped for speeding. Okay, so if it's you stop 5 cars, and 3 out of the 5
however, to be fair, if you
Can we let the chief finish the answering the question and then?
actually let me just make a point which I think needs to be made here, which is that if you set up, you're completely correct that the laser doesn't distinguish the race of the driver. But if you set up your camera in an area where you have only minority drivers, you're going to get minority stops.
Well, I don't disagree with that, Robin. Again, right? It goes back to exactly what I was just noting about. Why are we in that location in the first place? Right. So if I'm in a predominantly Black community, right, which is not a lot of them here in Montgomery County, but there you could say a large concentration of people of color may be in a particular area. But if I look at Route 29, it is a corridor, for example, that all people travel on. Sure. Right. So the bottom line is, again, what am I focused on? We're focused on what is the complaint, what is the problem, what is the data that we're looking at for crashes that we are trying to address? What are the problems that we are trying to solve? And that is where, to me, that is what you look for in the legitimacy of traffic enforcement, to make sure that you are stopping people for legitimate reasons, for safety reasons, right? That we just talked about. So I can go all across this county and we can look at specific communities. I got a complaint this morning about, or over the weekend, about people at Georgia Avenue and Forest Glen Road, people driving down Georgia Avenue who won't stop and make a right turn, or making an illegal right turn on red, causing pedestrian problems, right? Those again, okay, so I don't control who is in that community, for example. My goal is to deal with the problem because there's someone concerned about a safety concern there. That's where the focus needs to be. And as we move towards that, when you talk about other traffic enforcement, whether if I'm driving on patrol, I leave here tonight, I get in my vehicle and I'm headed home. No matter where I'm driving, I'm looking at the vehicle in front of me or beside me, at any time, but it's dark out at night, right? It's very hard, unless you're in a well-lit area, that you're going to know what the race of the driver is, that actually, particularly if they're in front of you. And I would challenge people to really kind of look, as you're driving, as we all do on our roadways, you look at the driver in front of you for us to detect what is the race of that driver. Now, if you're looking at a smaller community, more targeted enforcement, that you may say that, okay, if people are saying that we're in a particular community for whatever reason and we're stopping people for anything and we can see the race of the driver, you can make that argument. But I will tell you, those are not predominantly the larger number of traffic stops that are being made. The majority of traffic, if I'm sitting at a red light and I see a car drive through a red light, I'm not looking to see what the race of that driver is. I'm looking at the behavior of that car that just went through the red light. Now, at the time that we make the traffic stop, now it is what it is, right? At the end of the day, we don't control that. Now, from this point forward with the traffic stop, where the control comes into is, how do I handle the violator that's before me? So if the violator is a person of color, right, or anybody for that matter, how am I treating that driver as fairly as I would treat a white driver, right? So at the end of the day, the question is, if you stop 2 people for the same type of offense, are you giving those 2 people the same amount of respect, right? And you're treating them very similarly, not giving the black driver a ticket and giving the white driver a warning, as an example. Are you being fair? What I would tell you, even though we have, and if you look at our numbers, you will see we write incredibly more warnings than we write citations. I would suggest to this commission, and I've said this to the county council, to the public safety committee, what does a speed camera or red light camera don't have? It doesn't have discretion.
Right.
Okay, so whatever that light goes off, you're getting a ticket. Well, I can tell you that if I stop a 16-year-old for speeding, who I know just got their license, very young to understand traffic safety, I have an opportunity to educate that young driver, give that young driver a warning and say, slow down. And this is what, and give all the potential harms that this could happen if they don't do that. That's that opportunity that law enforcement has versus an automated speed camera.
Okay. So just two or three points, and then I'll shut up and hand it back to Dalvin. I completely take your point about census data. What you say is entirely accurate, that we don't know we don't know the racial and ethnic makeup of drivers in Montgomery County exactly, because there is no data for that. The state doesn't require ethnic and racial information on your driver's license. So nobody knows, and nobody can ever know really what the accurate count of drivers by group is in Montgomery County. But that doesn't mean that we can't do any studies, draw any conclusions. We have to work with the data we have. I accept that the census data is flawed. I totally accept that. But it's the only data we got.
But I think that you could get additional. I think there are other studies. This is my point, Robert. There are other studies. We have spoken to several experts in the field.
But it depends on
there are other studies out there that you can conduct that you would get better. You would get a better analysis to see what is occurring with your police department.
I don't think there is any alternative source of data in this state. Other states may capture other data on driver's licenses or even driver registrations. I mean, car registrations, maybe, I don't know. But unless there is some source of data that is actually about drivers and about cars on the road, we have the data we have, and waiting for perfect data isn't going to help us. So that's one quick point. A second point is I think you're right on the money in asking us and in seeking to distinguish between the rate at which drivers are stopped and what happens afterwards. I think that's right on the money. It's still difficult to disentangle, and I'm not, but I would point out, and probably you're not aware of this because this is also new research that has just been completed. You made the point that warnings are issued more than citations. That is true for everyone except Hispanics, because and I suspect it may be because of a language barrier, right? It's easy for you.
I don't know why.
We don't know why. So there are some differences there. And the third point I would make is just to reiterate. You made the point about nighttime stops being different. I would suggest that somebody should definitely do a study comparing daytime and nighttime stops. It's possible to do from the existing data, but it's complicated because you have to figure out when night falls. But if you found differences between stops at night and stops during the day, that would be telling. That would tell you something. I think at that point, I think I should turn this back over to Dalvin, and everyone else can go at it.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Chief Jones. All right, Chief Jones, we have 10 follow-up questions for you in 30 minutes. So I'm going to do this as judicious
I'll answer as quickly as possible.
Okay. All right. The first question came from Ms. Branson. Are the district commanders following the same traffic enforcement priorities as the traffic unit? That was pertaining to the very first question that we asked you.
As a centralized traffic unit, no. It's two different focuses, okay? So now what's happened is the district commanders are responsible for all community complaints within their district that are on our, pretty much our secondary, not your major arterial roadways. So these are your roadways in your neighborhoods, in your residential areas, or any other area that's not on those major roadways. The traffic, the district commanders are responsible for addressing those concerns with the constituents that live in their districts from that perspective.
Okay, thank you. I have another one from Ms. Branson. Please tell us what you believe is the reason for the disproportionate rate of traffic citations along racial lines.
I don't know the answer to that question. Again, I think I stated earlier about the analysis, which I would coincide with that. Again, it does beg the question, right? Again, with our officers about decisions about writing traffic citations. What drives you to write that citation, right? What is the reason for the citation versus the reason for the warning, right? I mean, I can tell you that there are individuals that they're from an officer standpoint, they're more centralized on writing citations to all of the drivers that they encounter. And then there may be those who are more on the other side of that, who are more lenient and who will provide more warnings regardless of who the drivers are. So there is and then there's those in the middle, I would imagine, from that perspective. Again, what I would like to see more in the data, as we even talk about this from an overall county perspective, but I want to know, where are those traffic stops being conducted when we look at the numbers of those, when we say that there's a disparity? Because I want to know where the traffic stops are occurring. Because again, it goes back to what is the legitimacy of the stop that would give us a better analysis to understand what's actually happening and a better focus upon that particular area of the county that would suggest that those officers working in that area have a tendency to write more to people of color than in other areas. I'd really want to be able to see that as we zero down on locations and the numbers of citations that we are issuing. And that's one of the things we'll be trying to see how we can grab that data out of in an analysis standpoint as we move forward.
Okay, so that answer actually lends itself to the next question. And I'm going to assume the answer is no, but feel free to let me know if I'm wrong. Has the Internal Affairs Division analyzed officer misconduct in the context of traffic stops?
So I would not say that the Internal Affairs Division has analyzed this. What I will tell you is that it is reviewed because any complaint that comes into Internal Affairs is shared with the district commander of that particular officer of the interactions that they have with the public if there was a complaint that came in. Okay. The body worn camera it gives us that tool that allows us to see that interaction as we address that complaint. And so if we know that we have an officer who gets multiple complaints, right, or that we flag, and we do have a flagging system that says that if this officer gets 3 or more complaints in a year, then we are going to bring that officer in and address what we see as a problem. So from that perspective, there is a little bit of a different route that it goes, but it is Internal Affairs is the central location to where complaints actually go.
Okay, so that actually ties into the next 2 questions. So that's perfect, but just so that way we're all clear. So what would generally happen is somebody would file a complaint, Internal Affairs would notify that officer's district commander.
Yes.
That's the process. Okay.
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely. And that district commander will be responsible for looking into that complaint based upon the complaint itself and
Gotcha.
have it investigated again with the review of body worn camera footage and talking to the complainant to get additional information to be able to see what was actually what the officer did wrong, if there was wrongdoing done by the officer, and address it accordingly. Correct.
Okay, thank you for that, Chief Jones. So then the next question is, in reviews of the use of force, do you happen to know what fraction of complaints arise out of traffic stops?
I don't know those numbers. I would bear to say to you, what's come across my desk is very minimal use of force cases out of traffic stops. Generally, it's more we see it out of other types of interactions, but it's not traffic stops as the majority.
Okay, that's helpful. So there was a question that came from Alicia that ties into a specific incident, and then I'm gonna go back to a question that's more general, okay?
Sure.
So as you know, we're getting ready to do this this public forum on traffic stops, and we've been receiving comments from the community. We received one in particular from a father who was driving with his wife and children in the back seat. The officer in the complaint, the officer was mean and aggressive, repeatedly asked to search their vehicle. The driver was refused and was eventually allowed to proceed on. It seems like the context for the stop was a broken tail light. I guess our question is, and this ties into the training of officers, and Chief Jones, you alluded to this a little bit, is one of the things you want to look at is what is the thinking behind one set of officers writing a citation versus other ones choosing to go the warning route, right? Do you have any ideas of changes that could be made in training to officers and how they conduct themselves during traffic stops? Because even that might have been the most harrowing concern that we received from the community, but there's a lot of comments like that, just very fearful, just comments of situations that just did not go in a positive route. So just any ideas on changes in training?
Absolutely. So, well, first of all, officers are trained to be cordial and courtesy during traffic stops. Let's start with that. Okay. In any interaction they have with the public, that's the expectation. Second of all, I will note that earlier this year in January, I changed our policy involving our traffic enforcement. And one of the things I changed was the fact that when an officer conducts a traffic stop for the very reason why they stopped them, they shall detain the driver for as long as necessary to conduct the procedural requirements of that stop. So for example, if you get stopped for whatever moving violation you got moved for, then you are basically to handle that traffic stop as quickly as possible under utilizing that. We are not going to be on a fishing expedition asking for multiple times for consent to search, as an example. So that this policy, once I made that policy, basically says that unless the officer has reasonable articulation, suspicion that there's criminal activity afoot, then basically you write that ticket and you let that driver go. Same thing for unless the driver consents to a continuation of the stop, then basically it's you, whatever you stop them for, write the citation, write the warning, and every traffic stop from this point forward, also in this new policy, requires that there is documentation of the traffic stop. So every traffic stop begins since January of this year, the end of January, the requirement is that every traffic stop must have documentation assigned to that traffic stop. Okay.
So that's helpful. And I'm just going to exercise privilege as chair to ask a follow-up on that. Is there for each traffic stop, right? Because you just mentioned, is there an average time that you tell officers, like, listen, if you're spending any more than 10 minutes on this stop, that's excessive? I'm trying to see how you measure that, because it ties into the next question, and something you said made me think of that. Like, are you training officers as to, like, listen, 7 minutes or less? Like, if you take it too long on this, like,
I don't necessarily put a timeline on it, and there's a reason why. One of the reasons is if a driver gets pulled over, there's an interaction with the driver. There might be a conversation. They might last 30 seconds. It might last 5 minutes, right? For that interaction. The point being is that if as an officer I go back to my car, and then I am running your information through our driver's license database, right? And looking through our computer to do a computer check. Again, as we all know, with computers, there can be delays, right, in responses. So we want, but at the end of the day, we look for those reasonable responses. I don't look for somebody to wait 15 minutes for a computer check to come back. And most officers wouldn't do that. But at the end of the day, we wait for that computer check to get back. If that computer, the check on that driver's license, making sure everything is good. And then, now we have the world of what we call e-tick. So it's a much easier process. Back in the dinosaur days when I was out there writing traffic tickets, it would, I had to write the ticket out. And if there are more than one ticket, it may take you a little bit longer for whatever reason, or you write in the warning, whatever the case may be. So any traffic stop can, generally we try to get them to last only 5 to 10 minutes. We don't really want it to be much longer than that unless there's some extenuating circumstances that says something different.
Thank you. That the reasonable time frame that you mentioned, 5 to 10 minutes. That's what I was looking for. Okay. Do officer complaints from the public have any bearing on their rating for community engagement?
Oh yes, absolutely. If we get multiple complaints against officers, and that's one thing you'll see officers have in their ratings, is the supervisors will reply about how many complaints that they have and how that was addressed. And if there are some deficiencies in the officer's performance, then that is highlighted through our supervisory files and how we address that officer's performance moving forward, and whether there is corrective behavior or corrective actions being taken to address that behavior, whether there needs to be retraining, whether there needs to be some other focus in order to make sure that the officer understands that this is unacceptable and and to be held accountable for that.
Okay, that's helpful. So in the OLO report, and in our last meeting, OLO came and presented their report, but we also had the report a few months in advance. So we were able to kind of sift through, and they did have a ton of data on the racial inequity in traffic enforcement. And as you as chief, right, you talked about the policy that you implemented in January to try to move things in a more equitable fashion. Do you have any ideas? And again, if you could wave a magic wand right now, today, any ideas for effective change to create or encourage more equitable traffic enforcement? Because the OLO data was pretty damning. I think we all can agree with that. It was very black and white for us, no pun intended, in terms of like you could see very clearly the differences in traffic enforcement. And we're wondering what ideas you have, given that you did implement this policy in January. What ideas do you have to create more equitable traffic and encourage more equitable traffic enforcement?
Well, I think at the end of the day, still it boils down to again, where are we conduct? I still want more data, right? I want really more information about where we're conducting stops and why, right? That's, again, this is what, as I have my commanders report out to me in our crime stat meetings, they're providing me feedback on traffic problems within their districts and how is that impacting in their communities. And so if I see, for example, if I knew that, we're focusing on this particular traffic problem because there's a legitimate public safety issue, then they will address that. But I want to make sure we're not doing other things, whether we're trying to utilize some other tools in order to conduct traffic stops, and we are treating people of color a lot differently based upon those actions. So we pay very close attention to the areas of that we're focused on, so that we understand that these are the areas that I have received if a commander came to me, Chief, this is what I received a complaint on. The community has been complaining about these traffic issues in this particular community. And yes, it may be a predominantly minority community, but we feel like something has to be done. If I have in certain areas, for example, on Piney Branch Road, I may have a problem with pedestrians being struck more times than not. Well, we know on Piney Branch Road, it's predominantly Latino, right, in that community. So, and I'm having victims that are being injured who are from the Latino community. And there are many drivers that are from different races, particularly in that corridor, that might be involved in those collisions as well. Or might be committing violations. So we really have to really delve deeper into that, and I need to know why. And again, this goes to, again, a larger part of education, that if I can work with CASA in Maryland, for example, and we've done this, we've worked with CASA in dealing with, pedestrian safety in those communities to help benefit, because I can tell you it's very destructive to see when you see pedestrians get struck. And we could have avoided that. and in many different ways. And so that is, again, of concern for me, that I think we owe that to our community to be able to educate them as much as possible as we move forward. But then it's still doing it in an equitable way, right? And we still, no matter who the violator is, are we giving them, again, are we treating them as fairly as we would treat anybody else for the same type of violation? And again, many officers work different areas of the county that are not all predominantly minority based, right? Some live in, work in majority white communities in parts of our county. And rarely may, and it doesn't necessarily have multiple encounters from that perspective. And may, in fact, in some areas, there we can see very little traffic enforcement in some of our more, outlying areas. When you go out to areas such as Poolsville and, and you're traveling, you're rarely running into, you may find officers that may not do as much traffic enforcement in those areas because there's less vehicles, there's less collisions, there's lots of that going on, but we still have to monitor because we still may have some of our roadways where we have dangerous actions driven by our drivers, and we want to make sure that our roadways are safe.
Perfect. Okay, I'm gonna go to Robin real quick because he has a follow-up to this specific question, and then I'm gonna get to Eric's 2 questions and then one from Alicia. Go, Robin. You're on mute. You're on mute.
A couple of very quick things. I think we need to fundamentally distinguish between what I would call directed traffic activities, especially the ones by CTU, but also in the district. That is, when you set up a specific enforcement area to deal with a specific problem, whether it comes from the community or from your analysis. That's one bucket of activity. And it's one where we have questions about the kind of analysis and the kind of data, but the kind of technical questions. But then
I don't think that's going to be hard for us to figure out.
Wait, I'm not done. The second bucket is a bigger bucket. It's a much bigger bucket. And it's the bucket of what I would say is undirected activity that the police patrol officers do in the normal course of their rounds. And there, it seems we have really very little information. And in the data, we can't really distinguish between those two categories. Is that right?
Well, it is right, because there's, again, Robin, there are multiple, as a patrol officer, you are responsible for patrolling an area of responsibility. And while you are out driving, if I'm driving anywhere in the county, I am looking for driver safety as I am driving down the roadway. And if vehicles are if there's a vehicle violating the speed limit, for example, it is my responsibility to stop that car and to address that violation.
So actually, there's something there which I think is really important. Last week, the Philadelphia City Council decided that 7 categories of minor traffic offenses will no longer be grounds for stopping anyone. Would you be interested in pursuing that kind of limitation?
No, I would not. And I'll give you an example why. If you tell me that a car is driving down a roadway such as, let's say, Route 28 coming out of Darnestown with no taillights, driving on a roadway that has no street lights, I would deem that car to be very dangerous. If you would tell me a car that has no brake lights is a safe vehicle, I would argue that it is not. So I think that there are these, and again, in Maryland, I think one of the benefits that people have here in Maryland is that you simply get an equipment repair order. You don't get a ticket, you get an equipment repair order that basically says that you have 15 days in order to correct the tail light out, the brake lights out, and that you can easily take it to a police station and have an officer visually check it, check the box, and send you on your merry way. And so I am not so much in favor. I think Philadelphia is a different animal. It's an urban setting. Montgomery County is not totally urban. Many of our roadways are dark. They are dreary. And there are times if a vehicle doesn't have headlights or one headlight functioning, I think it can create danger. I've seen it, and I live in somewhat of a suburban rural area, and I see that way too often. So I'm not in support of that per se from that perspective. I understand why people might feel that way, but I don't think that is the end to make sure we have a safer roadways. I would not say that. Going back to your point about the bucket, the first bucket, clearly by our design of the central traffic unit, we're going to be able to see specifically the impact, the statistical data that they are providing on a weekly basis or monthly basis to show where's the work that they have been exhibiting, and what's been the impact of that. And we'll be doing analysis particularly for our collisions on those roadways as well. As far as the other traffic complaint officers, we'll be working towards having our district commanders providing a list of those locations that they are constantly getting complaints on, and what are some of the results of the activities that their officers are responding to and handling as a result of those complaints.
Okay, Mr. Ricks, let me get to Eric's questions because they were submitted initially, and then I'll come back to you. Okay. Okay, these came from Eric. Eric, my apologies for the delay. So Eric had a question pertaining to the example that you gave, Chief Jones, pertaining about the morning rush hour on Georgia Ave at Colesville Road, a short distance from the Paul Sarbanes Transit Center in downtown Silver Spring. And so Eric used the example of each workday's morning rush hour is about 3 hours, and you're talking about 20 work days per month, that's 60 hours. Double that to include evening rush hour, you're looking at about 120 hours, give or take. How many hours per month, and this is general, I know this, if you say 55 and it comes back to be 58, we're not going to hold you accountable to you saying 55, but how many hours per month would you say an officer is assigned to policing dangerous behavior at such a key intersection? For example, you noted regarding Colesville Road from Burtonsville South to Silver Spring on the one highway, there's easily a half dozen interactions where there's dangerous cross traffic, left turns, pedestrians walking and running to catch a bus or cross the highway. How many hours per month might be devoted to protecting safety at such intersections, give or take?
So given the limited number of central traffic officers that I currently have, again, I have around 23 to 25. I can't remember exactly the number, but I'm in that ballpark.
Okay.
And those officers are split between the day work hours, Monday through Friday, and the PM hours. So you have a focus of, let's say, 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., right? With an overlap of 12 p.m., I believe, to 10 p.m. for the evening officers. And again, not only are they responsible for that enforcement in those corridors, but they are also they're also responsible for handling traffic collisions, as far as collision investigations that might be occurring in the areas in which they are assigned. So granted, with those officers, they are handling all 6 police districts. So if I handle the 3rd district, for example, this week, that we might focus on 29, let's say as an example, a stretch of 29 or a large stretch of 29, we will put as many hours on the AM and the PM if that's how the divisional director has worked with the district commanders in order to let them know that they're working in those areas, and that's going to be their primary areas of focus. Okay. And so understand we're dealing with the entire county, right? 6 different districts. And everybody, and then we've got issues in all 6 districts. So we want to kind of give that equality of focus all across the county so that we make sure that we're addressing those issues across as we see them based upon the numbers that we have been presented.
Okay, so I have two questions that go together. What's the role of the Maryland State Police in traffic enforcement on roads in Montgomery County aside from the interstate highways? And just how often do you guys cooperate? And how routinely do you guys communicate to each district court judge pertaining to the quality and credibility of testimony received from MCPD officers when it comes to traffic stops? So it's those two. Answer them in whichever order you feel.
So the Maryland State Police, they are primarily responsible for Interstate 270 and Interstate 495, the Beltway. They handle it literally from New Hampshire Avenue on the Beltway all the way to the American Legion Bridge. And then the responsibility is from the 270 spur to the Frederick County line. Generally, they have 2, maybe 3 troopers working on any given shift. So that is their primary functionality of the roadways unless they go onto an arterial roadway, which they're still on patrol, and they have the authority because they're state police that they can stop anybody in Montgomery County on any roadway. But we work with them, our traffic unit, anything specifically particularly towards selective enforcement. We will do certain enforcement details with them about certain types of driving. For example, we've had complaints about motorcycles that will clog up our interstates, doing reckless driving and wheelies and all of that, and really stopping in middle roadways. We work with them on those types of projects, and we've done some other things with them with car meetups and loud mufflers and drag racing and those types of incidents. So we will work with the state police on that as well. The second piece about
just how often you guys are in touch with the district judges?
I would not say often. We have relationships, with judges, particularly the administrative judges. So the administrative judge from the district court we have an open line of communication. If there is an issue, Judge Koch, I meet with her monthly on the Criminal Justice Coordinating Commission. And if there's anything of significance that she thinks that needs to be raised, we can either have a one-on-one conversation about that, or we generally will, be in person if need be in order to address any situation that is deemed to be a problem.
Okay, and then Mr. Ricks, one last question before I go to you. Chief Jones, you mentioned the need for more data, right? And wanting additional data in order to be able to make certain decisions. The ELE4A audit, and their preliminary recommendations have come out. Do you anticipate utilizing the data that was in that audit to come up with some tangible solutions to improve some of these outcomes that we're talking about, like traffic enforcement, like drug, things like that? Absolutely.
I'm hoping that, there will be some recommendations there that we'll be looking to possibly implement. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Well, Mr. Ricks, go ahead. And I promise I did not leave you for last, Mr. Ricks.
That's all right. I like that. I like that. Chief, one of my pet peeves on traffic enforcement, and I agree with you 100% on this not going with this Philadelphia thing, and I read the article. One of my pet peeves is that we have had tremendous storms and terraining and all kinds of things. They have signboards, lighted signboards that are up on, and they put up saying use lights and when you're using your wipers.
Right.
There are cars that are going along the road on the highway with no lights, and you cannot see them, and they're going along 70 miles an hour. Right. They will eventually get off of 270 and go into the neighborhood, and they still don't have lights and things on. So to me, it's a safety issue, and that's just one thing. When you mentioned about the cars with one light out, sometimes when you look back in your rearview mirror, it looks like a motorcycle.
Right.
If it's dark enough, you don't see the rest of the car. So the issues that I agree with you. The last thing is I would personally like to add my condolences to the department and the family of Lieutenant Fitz, who we lost recently in a traffic accident. And it was a great loss to the department.
Thank you, Mr. Ricks. I appreciate that. Definitely with the sympathy, the words of sympathy. That's is greatly appreciated. We appreciate that.
Chief Jones,
Yes, sir.
1 minute to spare.
Ah,
1 minute to spare. We honestly thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you for answering all of our questions. I'm not gonna lie to you. We will probably have follow-up, but that will come in the form of an email.
absolutely. Well, again, I'm more than happy to come back to explain more. I think sometimes doing it in person, we can understand it a little bit better.
Yeah.
But we're more than happy. We know we have some responses that for some questions that you all ask, and we're preparing to get those answers to you. So yeah, but we'll be more than happy to come back in person if you need us, and whatever you need, just let us know.
Thank you very much, Chief Jones. Pack, we are wrapped. It is 8 o'clock.
Thank you all. Have a good evening.
Have a
Congratulations.
good night, guys.
Thank you,
All right, good
Chief
night.
Jones.
Bye.